when I plug this in, my text gets tiny, and I have old eyes. So we're going to talk today about enums and some things that you can do with enums and that I do with enums to kind of make my life a little bit better. When they first came out, I thought of them much like class constants and used them in much that same way. Uh, but over the course of the last few months, while working on a new project with a partner, we've gone back and forth, had some really lengthy code reviews, and just kind of discovered that sometimes it makes sense to use enums as more than just a store of specific values. That sometimes you can take a little bit of the logic of your app and put it inside of the enum and get some real benefit from that. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some ways that you probably are using enums already. I'm going to show you a simple enum-powered user roles system. And then a big one is how enums help me to make testing a lot easier. Um, and then I threw together a logging system. I don't know if anybody here uses Honeybadger, but they sent out an email last week that they've added an API endpoint to accept logs. And I use Honeybadger for all of my exception handling, and my applications are all in Vapor. And the Vapor logging story has never been really good, and I've never found a good solution for it. And so I thought, you know what? I wonder if I can just throw together a quick Honeybadger driver for logging. It turns out it was really easy to do, and I did it inside of an enum, so I will show you that. Uh, and then, if we have time, I'll show you a couple of examples of fat enums in the wild. One little warning here, some of the things that I do aren't exactly considered best practices. I'm not saying that you should do the things that I'm going to do here today. Just pointing out that you can do them, and if you find that it makes your life easier, sometimes that's what really matters. So let's get started here. That's right. All right, so I put together here this really simple, we'll call it a news site. We have users and we have articles, and that's what we're gonna work with here today as I show you how these enums work. Since this is a Laravel meetup, I'll show you. You can see this article categories class here inside of cast. What I'm doing here is I'm casting category to this article categories enum. Which is this. It's just what you would expect to find: sport, fashion, culture, true crime, and world politics. As any good publication will have. Um, and yeah, if I were to, we'll go into Tinkerwell here. Oh, if I seeded probably haven't seeded my database. I should probably do that or this is not work. So we'll do refresh. There we go. All right, so we're gonna look at our first article here. And we see that it's in the category world politics. Now, if you notice the format here, it's world politics in this, what do you call that, Pascal case? Because in this case, this is an unbacked enum. If this were a string-based enum, it would store the string. If it were an integer-based enum, it would store the integer. In this case, because it's an unbacked enum, it stores the name. So yeah, I just seeded a bunch of articles in, and they are kind of randomly assigned to a category. So that's kind of the most basic use of enums in a Laravel app. I'm sure everybody if you probably use this already. Not really that exciting. Just a couple quick observations about enums. When you cast it to an enum, when you get it back from Eloquent, it comes back as an enum. So here I see world politics as a name. Here's a quirk. I don't know why this happens. And maybe somebody here knows the answer, but if I do this, I get nothing. When Tinkerwell is supposed to show an actual enum, it just gives me something blank. Now I know that this is actually loaded. I know it exists because if I look for its name with Tinkerwell, I get the name. So if anybody here knows why that happens and wants to explain that to me either now or after, I'd love to hear it. Now I have this this trait here. You notice I'm using a fat enums trait on here. I just threw a couple of methods in here. The first one to look at is random. I use this in my seeder, obviously, because I want to seed a bunch of articles with random categories. And so this is exactly actually what I wrote to select who got that license. So really simple logic here. So what I'll do is I'll uncomment this and we'll just get random enums out of. So seems really like true crime, getting a lot of true crime here. Should have made it a bigger set. Anyway, the other thing for people who use filament, and I know there are some of you here, um, you probably have situations where you have enums and you want to be able to use them in forms, and you kind of have to jump through hoops to get them formatted the way you want them. This is what they look like for me using formatted options. That's another method that I have on this trait. And what I do here, if it's unbacked enum, I just use the name as the value, or as the key, and then I do this string headline, the case name, as the value. So that gives me a nicely formatted uh, array that works great in filament. Again, if it were integer back, the key here would be the integer. If it was string back, the key would be the string. So anyway, I had thought about, and I will probably eventually release this as a package, and I'll probably have a couple of arguments on here that would allow you to select what you actually want as the key and what formatting you'd want on the value. But it's a really simple kind of proof of concept. This is something that uh, now I'll say in my day-to-day work, I don't actually have this trait. I end up writing this logic into a lot of my enums, and so as part of going through this talk and thinking this through, I'm definitely gonna start building out these traits, and I will eventually package it up because I think a lot of this stuff could be useful for a lot of people. And I know even if nobody else uses it, I'm gonna use it a lot. So that's the categories. Now let's go on to art. Now let's get rid of these things though, because close all tabs. Art show fixtures. All right. So I have I think everybody here runs into this from time to time. You have records in your database, either in your test database or sometimes even in your production database, where you have a record that's actually important in code. It's important in the app. And so you might have somewhere in your code where you're specifically doing a find on a specific record using the ID, or you maybe have thought, well, that's sloppy, I don't want to do that. So you create like a slug field and you're searching for it by a slug. That's one of the first things that I started using enums for. It's a really obvious use case for enums. So in this case, I have users, and it's each one has just an integer for an ID, and these are the IDs that they just happen to have. Well, I just store those in an enum, and now whenever I need one of these users, either in a test or in my application, I can use the enum to reach for them. And then I did the same thing here with articles. Now in articles, in this case, I happen to be using ULIDs as the primary key rather than integers, and so it's a string back enum. But essentially the same thing. So I just have this enum that helps me to reach for fixture data or data that I need either in test or in production easily by just knowing the name rather than having to look at some table to find the ID, or worse, open up Table Plus and look to see what the ID is. And I've done that, and it's not pretty. Oh, my notes are gone. You get this thing not to time out. So next thing to show here is user roles. User roles are, in this case, I've just set up an enum, right? If you're a guest, you're not subscribed to the magazine, you're just kind of showing up to read the free articles, you have a value of 0. If you're a subscriber, meaning you're paying me money, you have a value of 10. If you write for me, you can read all my articles for free because you're helping out, so you get a 20, editors 30, admins 40, owners 50. So this is how I can control who has access to what. I've thrown together this quick policy here that enforces that. And you'll notice that I have this user role subscriber greater than or equal to contains user role. Where is this? Oh, yeah, you know what? I didn't open that file. Um, so I will open this integer back. So I have this integer backed enum class trait, and I just threw some things in here. And what let's see, let's go to GTE. This is the one we're looking at. What this would do, if I didn't pass an argument to it, is it would just return a collection of uh, any of the enum instances that are greater, that have a value greater than the one that that I'm comparing against. So you actually call this on an enum instance. So like here, I'm calling it on subscriber. So what I would then get is a collection of any roles that are greater than or equal to subscriber. And then just for my own convenience, I put in this contains argument so that I can pass um, another value to it and say, is this value contained within that collection? And then it turns it into a Boolean, which makes it really easy for doing um, things like this policy, right? So where's my policy? Yeah. So basically, if the current user's role is greater than or equal to subscriber, then I'm going to return true so they can do this thing. And here, same with if the user's role is less than contributor, I'm not going to let them do it because obviously, if you're just a subscriber or a reader, I don't want you editing my articles. You know, it's just not something you should be able to do. So this allows me to kind of encapsulate a lot of logic about several roles that people might have within the site in a really simple kind of one line. And to demonstrate that, I have my test because we all write tests, right? So let's see if this test passes. Our test filter equals. Yeah, so my test passed. That's good. I wasn't actually 100% sure that was going to work. Um, so when I go to reach for this data here, and so most of the stuff that I have in my test users and what I mean the name implies test articles, this is for my test. This allows me to kind of build the world one time in a seeder and not have to keep redoing, you know, like for every test I don't have to sit there and kind of build out what all the data looks like. I can create a fairly small data set that encompasses all of the different situations that I might encounter in my app. And then I can reach for the specific actors in my test by just reaching for this enum. So here I have this an article. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that everybody can view free articles. So I have this free article that I have seeded into my database, and I know the ID of it. And obviously I can do this. But what I can also do, because I have on this enum here, I've just added this little get. Um, and I do this a lot. If I have an enum like this, like a fixture records enum, and I know that everything in here represents an article, for instance, I'll just throw a get method on here, which will then return that item. So I don't have to write a bunch of queries in my tests or wherever I happen to be using it. I will just do, so I can just do article equals test articles test free get. And now, in theory, my tests still pass. So this comes about because I just kind of find myself doing the same things over and over and think, is there a way that I could take this thing that I'm doing a lot and just throw it into the enum itself? And that's how enums start to get fat, right? Because you find things that you keep doing with the enum over and over, and you think, you know, if I just move that logic out of all of these places I'm using it and throw it into the enum itself, I can reach for it a whole lot easier. So yeah, that's that. And this is on a huge complex app, obviously, where you have just thousands and thousands of different types of interactions, it's not necessarily easy or feasible to create the universe one time. But on a simple app like this one, this demo that I did, or even the app that I'm building currently with my partner that we're gonna be releasing in 6 weeks, it's gonna, you know, it's a big SaaS app that we hope is gonna reach a whole lot of people. And so it's a real world application. All of our tests are handled with one test seeder that builds the world, and every possible scenario that could exist in the app exists within the seeded data. we seed it one time and we reach for all the different actors in it using these enums. And so I never have to think about that whole, when you're writing tests, it's set up, then do something, and then assert. I don't have to do the setup. The setup is already done. So, do with that as you will. It's not going to fit every use case, but for a simple app where you can actually envision, if you can hold the world in your head, you can probably do this. Um, and yeah, I mean, this is my database seeder. It's basically exactly what you would expect. I don't think there's anything in here that's particularly interesting. And then I showed you the integer back enum and these little handy things. So I think we're done with the fixture data and tests and all that stuff. So let's get on to this fun one, the logging. All right, so here is the honey badger. This should be the page where this will get logged to. So I just have some log channels here. One of the things I like to do, Laravel by default, it'll write everything to just like a log.txt file. And so all of your logs just end up all together. I don't like to log my exceptions. My exceptions go to Honeybadger, to my exception handler. If I'm working locally, they go into, well, now Herd. I'm starting to play with that. But I don't want exceptions clogging up my logs. What I want my logs to be about is what is going on in my application that is generally happy path, right? It's, I want to know that somebody upgraded, somebody downgraded, somebody. I do log 404s because I like to know if I have a broken URL. I don't want those clogging up my, Honeybadger. But, so I like to have logs organized by what they are. So, these are obviously very contrived. I don't run a news magazine, so I don't know what information I would actually care about. But I think about, what do I actually care about? What events in my application do I care about and want to be able to go back and see? And I like to create a log channel for those. And so traditionally what I would have done if I were logging to somewhere that I could log to a file system is I would have these different channels mapped to different files in file systems. So all of my submitted articles will be logged to articles submitted.txt, and then the article edited would be article edited.txt. And so all of my activities would be there. You may not love that. I do happen to like it. So I did something very similar to this at my now former day job. Again, we're on Vapor. The Vapor logging story is a nightmare. There's just no good way to log Vapor. I actually had a SAS for a while. It was, trying to solve that. It was a lot to try to keep people happy though. So I decided not to do that. So what I ended up doing with this was I created this basically the same log channel enum, but I made it an eloquent driver. So what it was doing was I had a database table that I was logging everything to, which, maybe not the best way to be keeping logs, but that's only because, generally speaking, people use their logs to keep track of exceptions. And if your app is in an exception state, your database might not be working, so you're going to miss things. That's not why I'm logging. So if an exception is thrown, whatever I want to log didn't happen anyway. So the exception is being thrown to Honeybadger, so I'm fine. I can log to my database, and that doesn't bother me at all. But then Honeybadger came out with this API endpoint and said, hey, just throw your logs to us. And I'm already using their service, right? I'm already going there every day to see all the great ways that I've managed to break my app, and there are plenty. So I thought, hey, I'm going to give this a try. So I threw this together, and I was at a birthday party with my kid, sitting there at a table as everybody's eating cake, and I wrote this in literally 10 minutes. Like, just threw it together. I'm like, got home, I'm like, I wonder if this will work. And sure enough, it worked. So I'll walk you through what it does first, and then I'll actually show in real life that it works. I have these are the different channels here, because, again, I like to keep things organized. And then every log level that Laravel supports, or that really exists, right, exists here. I probably would only ever use info, notice, and maybe debug. I don't think I would ever, write emergency. Who knows? The day may come when I would do that, but it's there if I want it. But this makes the API feel similar enough to the Laravel API that when I have somebody working for me and they read this documentation, they'll be like, oh, okay, I know how to do that, rather than having to learn something completely new. And this is it. This just kind of builds up this array. It takes any context, because I want to be able to maybe send some context to my log. So I have the ability to pass context in as an array. I merge it with default context, which in this particular case, I think I'm just doing the currently logged in user. Obviously I could build this out as much as I wanted to. This all gets slapped together and flattened by Honeybadger and turned into a nice JSON file. So, and then I posted to their endpoint using the same API key that I use for my exception handling. I didn't have to add anything new. It was just use what I've already got. So now I should be able to just go log channel info. Oh wait, no, log channel, what was it? Article, archive, info, Ruslan archived my article. I'm gonna throw this in there a couple times. Seems like sometimes it doesn't happen the first time. Again, I wrote it in 10 minutes, haven't done any testing on it. And eventually here, this should show up with something there. There we go. Is this how you should log your apps? I don't know, but it works for me. I like it. So anyway, in a couple minutes, I'll show you just really quickly. Oops, no. It's a problem with this is I can't like open up this repo and show you the code because this is from my now former employer, now consulting client. This is something kind of big that we did with an enum, and as you can see, it's bitwise. So what we're doing here is we have this big system that takes a bunch of video clips of an athlete, right? So an athlete will watch game footage of themselves, they'll tag themselves in this game footage, they'll enter information in about what we just watched, and they'll cut all these things up and compile it into a highlight video and deliver the highlight video to the athlete. It's a really big, complex system. It's using FFmpeg, and it can break 1,000 different ways. It is absolutely crazy how many different ways this can break. So this is how we handle when it breaks. And we do it this way because obviously these things can break in more than one way at a time. So I don't want to have a separate column for each possible way that something can go wrong. We just have one column, it holds an integer, and that represents all the different ways in which something is broken. So inside of this enum, we have something called getFailure class. And for each one of the cases in the enum, there is a class that corresponds with it. That class has a diagnose method, and I don't know if you can see on this one, probably no, if I scroll down, yeah. And also has a handle method. And I'm not gonna, again, show any details to do it, but basically what the diagnose method does is anytime there's an error with one of these videos, we'll go through every single case in the enum and we'll run it through this diagnose to see, did it fail in this way? And if it did, then we record that it failed in this way. Then the next thing we do is we go through every single case where it failed and we run the handle method, and that attempts to fix it. And in a lot of cases, it's a matter of, a queue timed out. So, we just try it again. Maybe it won't time out this time. Sometimes it's a matter of they used a special character in their name that we didn't think of. When you're using, I don't know if it's FFmpeg or one of the packages we're using, it gets kind of funny with some non-Latin characters. And so sometimes we have to transform those or strip them out. And, we've caught the ones we've caught, and then somebody will come up with a new one. And then, of course, then, okay, now we have to add something else to this particular failure case. But this makes it nice and easy for us to identify the different individual ways in which one of these things can fail, and then write a nice, easy script to detect that that's why it failed. And then as we learn more about how to fix it, automate the process of fixing it. So it gets to the point where a failure happens, the system recognizes the failure happened, identifies the failure, fixes the failure. The end user never knows anything went wrong. All they know is that they got their video and everything worked. And in the rare occasion when we either hit a failure mode that we don't recognize, we have the unknown, and that means I'm going to get something in Slack saying, hey, we have unknown failures, there's something going on we have not identified yet. Or one where our fixes aren't working, and then a Slack message, hey, one of our fixes isn't working, we have to go in and work on that. but just this constantly improving system where we never really have to battle the same thing a second time. Once we find a way to identify it and fix it, it stays fixed. And all of this done basically in an enum. It will add a bunch of different handler classes, but so yeah, that's it. Do we have any questions about any of this stuff? Any concerns? Any complaints?
Enums are nice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal this for a scraper I'm working on, and every day I find a new way of how people write.
It's
I had the case that they actually had a mistake in not the first line. First line is doc type, but in the second line, in the opening HTML tag. I mean, how good are browsers that they still display those pages nicely, but
yeah, browsers are really forgiving, but scrapers, it's a lot harder to be that forgiving. So yeah. So the thing I'm not going to show tonight, and I was originally going to, but when I first timed this thing, it went over an hour. So I had to had to take a big machete to it and be like, lots of stuff I'm not going to show you. So as I mentioned, I'm building a SaaS with a couple of friends, and we're going to be launching in about 6 weeks. And one of the things that I'm doing with enums is they actually manage our entire subscription system, right? So if somebody pays us, it's an enum that determines how much they're paying us and which level of subscription they're at. And then I'm using from there, and this is why I decided not to show it, because I could turn this into another talk at some point. I'm using Laravel Pennant to govern what users at different levels of subscription can actually do. So rather than doing the traditional policies and gates to check for subscription levels and things like that, basically whenever somebody's subscription status changes, I just use Laravel Pennant to update the database with the features that they're allowed or not allowed to use. And again, this is all basically encapsulated inside of an enum, and then I'm using the Pennant. Does anybody here use Pennant for feature flagging? Yeah.
Not in production.
Yeah, so I'm using the class-based features, and I just enable the ones that are enabled for your subscription level and disable the ones that are not. And so, but I feel like the Pennant is a cool thing, and I'm definitely using it off-label, but even just using it for what it's intended for, I think that's something that somebody here should give a talk on. And if nobody steps up and does it, eventually I will do it. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I decided to try this Pinkery thing. So that's where you can find me, is on that Pinkery